You are not going to notice the new tax when it arrives, because it will not show up as a line on a government form. It will show up as a pause. You tap transfer, the wheel spins, and the screen calmly says, pending for review. Then, like it is doing you a favor, it offers instant for $4.99. You can almost feel your stomach do that little drop, because you were not trying to buy anything. You were trying to move your own money. And here's the part that makes this different from the old world of fees. The fee is not the worst part. The delay is. The delay is what turns a normal adult into someone begging a screen for permission, because the delay hits rent, groceries, autopay, payroll, the stuff that does not care about, up to 10 business days. Now layer on the second moment, the one that feels even more personal. You are logging in, or posting, or getting paid, and suddenly you are locked out until you verify. You do the selfie. Bad lighting. Try again. We could not confirm your identity. Try again. And right there in the same help menu is the upgrade. Priority support, expedited review, premium assistance, anything with that word priority that means you can buy your way out of the waiting room. That is the shift I want you to see, because by the time 2026 really kicks in, millions of people will be paying to remove friction that did not exist before, and it will be framed as safety, convenience, and compliance, not extraction. I'm not asking you to panic. I am asking you to recognize a pattern early, while it still looks like random glitches. Because the first stage always looks like accidents, the second stage looks like policy, and the third stage looks like standard. Here is the simple promise of this video. By the end, you will be able to look at a hold, a new fee, a verification step, or a policy update, and tell whether it is genuine protection or whether it is the start of a toll booth being built around something you cannot live without. And once you see it that way, 2026 will not feel like a random year someone threw into a title for drama. It will feel like a hinge year, when today's annoyances start behaving like a system. If you want more finance stories told this way, where history explains the present instead of lecturing at it, subscribe. Not because I'm going to sell you a miracle fix, but because on Stay Financial Historian, we keep a running map of these patterns as they evolve, and it is a lot easier to protect yourself when you can see the gates being built in real time. Now, let's be fair for one clean moment, because this topic can turn into paranoia if we are sloppy. Fraud is real, scams are real, and tighter security is often necessary. The point is not security is fake. The point is what happens after security becomes the excuse for gatting. Once a gate exists, someone eventually figures out how to monetize the key. And the key is almost always speed, certainty, and access. So when I say tax, I am not claiming there is a new law secretly passed. I am talking about a modern kind of extraction that behaves like a tax because it is unavoidable, constant, and tied to necessities. To understand why it feels medieval, you need one historical story, and I will keep it tight. In medieval France, there was a hated tax called the Gabelle, the salt tax. Salt was not a luxury, it was survival. It preserved food, fed armies, kept people alive through winter. So the crown did not just tax salt, it controlled salt, where you could buy it, how much you had to buy, and what happened if you tried to route around official channels. The genius was not cruelty, it was architecture. You do not need to chase every person. If you control the gate where necessity passes through, that is the model that is coming back. Only now it is wrapped in clean apps, customer support scripts, and friendly language like trust and verification. Before we go deeper into castles and kings, let us cash this out in modern life, so you know I am not just telling a clever metaphor. Think about the 3 things you probably touched in the last day without even thinking: getting paid, proving who you are, and being seen by an algorithm. Getting paid does not just mean money arrives. It means it arrives, and then it is available on someone else's timeline unless you pay. Proving who you are is not one ID check anymore. It is ongoing. Device checks, risk flags, re-verification, random, security holds, and being seen by an algorithm is not guaranteed reach. It is reach that can disappear, and the fastest way back is often paid. Those are not three separate issues. They are three versions of the same gate. And once gates become normal, tolls become normal. Now meet Chris, because this stops being an interesting theory only when it lands on a person. Chris is a regular guy. W-2 job, plus a couple side income streams, because everything costs more than it used to. He drives some weekends. He sells a few things online. He does the normal modern hustle. In 2024 and 2025, his stress is mostly inflation and unpredictability. In 2026, his stress changes flavor. It becomes administrative. It becomes waiting. It becomes permissions. One Thursday, his side gig payout is supposed to hit before an auto pay. Instead, it gets stuck. Routine review. He taps help. The bot repeats policy. Then the bot offers the solution like it is normal. Premium tier includes live chat and expedited review. Chris does not want to pay to access his own earnings. He also does not want a late fee. So he pays. That is the moment you should sit with, because it is the modern equivalent of paying the Lord's clerk to move your petition to the top of the stack. It is not a transaction for a better product. It is a payment to remove a delay that can wreck your week. And that is why 2026 matters. Not because the world flips overnight, but because the incentives that create these moments line up harder and more broadly than they did before. Here is the mechanism, in plain English. The moment a tool becomes infrastructure, the owner of that tool becomes a landlord. Landlords do not need to create value from scratch. They charge for access to value. For years, the internet felt like an open field. You could root around gatekeepers. You could switch easily. But as the field turned into a set of highways owned by a few operators, the business model changed. In the growth era, platforms subsidize you to get you in the door. In the profit era, they meter you. And metering is the new Gabelle, because metering lets the gatekeeper take a little bit from everything you do, quietly, constantly, and with plausible deniability. You have already felt the first wave, even if you did not name it, the little charges that show up everywhere. The service fee that was not there before. The processing fee that somehow exists even though everything is automated. The convenience fee for paying a bill online, which is basically charging you to save them money. The spread on currency conversion. The fee to cash out faster. The subscription to unlock basic features that used to be included. Each one is small enough that you do not start a fight. But they do not need you to start a fight. They need you to accept the pattern. And this is where we stop circling and start escalating. Because the digital Gabelle does not hit you in one way. It hits in 3 waves. And each wave gets more personal. Wave 1 is money extraction. That is the FEs and the skims. Annoying but survivable. Wave 2 is access extraction. That is when money is there but not usable. When accounts are yours but restricted. When your reach is available but throttled. Wave 3 is behavior extraction. That is when you start shaping your life around not getting flagged, not getting delayed, not getting locked out. You change how you transact. You change where you keep money. You change what you say and where you say it. That is the medieval part. Not because we are going back to horses, but because we are going back to living under gates. Now, let us answer the question you are probably holding. Why 2026 specifically? Here is what makes it a hinge year in practice, not just in theory. First, the profitability cycle finishes flipping. By 2026, the big platforms and payment intermediaries are under heavier pressure to show clean margins, not growth someday. That is when you see more emails with subject lines like, "We are updating our price, new features are moving to Pro, changes to payout timing." To continue using this feature, and the coldest phrase in the modern economy, effective immediately. Second, the post-election policy tightening tends to hit with a lag. New enforcement priorities turn into new reporting, new checks, more responsibility pushed onto intermediaries. When responsibility is pushed onto intermediaries, intermediaries charge for it. Third, faster payment rails and embedded finance get more common, and that sounds like progress, but it creates a new lever: speed. In a world where money can move instantly, the ability to slow you down becomes power, and the ability to remove delay becomes a product. Fourth, AI moves from cool tool to quiet gatekeeper, not because AI is evil, but because AI is expensive and it is built to minimize risk, not maximize fairness. If the model is uncertain, it does not shrug. It holds, it flags, it blocks. And that uncertainty creates demand for paid bridges, because the most valuable thing in a gated system is fewer false positives. Now, put those together, and you get the modern version of the salt monopoly. Not a monopoly over a mineral, a monopoly over trust. Trust is the new salt, because you cannot opt out of it. Trust is whether your bank believes you. Trust is whether a platform believes your account is real. Trust is whether your payout is instant or pending. Trust is increasingly quantified, and once something is scored, it can be rented back to you. You can feel this already in the world of verified badges and account health dashboards. That is not just status. It is a paid passport, and it is going to expand because it solves two problems at once. It reduces fraud complaints, and it creates a new revenue stream. Let me give you a scene that is painfully normal, because normal scenes are where the story lives. You are buying something online. You hit confirm. It fails. Not because you do not have the funds, because the system wants one more check. You approve the text message. Try again. Still fails. Now, the message turns colder. Your account is temporarily restricted. You did not commit a crime. You tripped a model, and there is no human clerk behind a booth to argue with. Just a workflow. You appeal. You wait. You get an estimated response time that might as well be a joke. And then, like clockwork, the system offers the shortcut, enhanced support with faster review. That moment is the modern petition. And if you think people will not pay, remember, Chris, people pay when waiting hurts. Which brings us back to the most important twist in this whole video, the one I want to move from interesting to obvious in your mind. The fee is not the worst part. The delay is. A traditional tax takes money. A modern gate can take time, and time is often more valuable than money. A 3-day hold is not an inconvenience if you have savings. It is a crisis if you are living on timing. And when the system can impose delay, it can sell speed. That is why instant is everywhere now, and why instant is rarely free. Once speed becomes a product, everything else becomes the slow lane by design. That is not tyranny in one dramatic headline. It is a design choice that becomes a social reality. And you can see the blueprint because it repeats across industries. Standard shipping versus expedited, standard support versus priority. Standard payout versus instant, standard reach versus boosted. Each one is reasonable alone. Together, they rebuild a world where normal life is intentionally slowed unless you pay. Now, let's talk about payment rails for a minute. But I'm going to make it concrete, not abstract plumbing. Imagine a simple $100 sale for a small business. The customer taps a card. The business thinks, great, 100. But the money walks through a corridor of toll booths, network fees, processing fees, platform fees, fraud reserves, chargeback risk, settlement delay. The business often does not see all of it clearly. They just see the deposit smaller than expected and the timing longer than they want. Then, to get the money faster, there is an option, instant settlement for a fee. That is the Gabelle logic again. You can have what is yours on someone else's schedule for free, or on your schedule for a price. Now widen the lens to the gig economy. Chris gets paid weekly, but weekly is not weekly if there is a hold. So he starts using instant payout. That is a small fee each time. Small fees are the most powerful kind, because they do not trigger your alarm. They trigger your resignation. And resignation is what turns an extraction model into infrastructure. Now the skeptics in the room might say, fine, I will just switch apps. Sometimes that works. But here is the uncomfortable reality. Switching helps until the whole ecosystem adopts the same architecture. When every major player faces the same fraud pressure, the same compliance pressure, and the same investor pressure, they converge on the same tactics. Add friction to the default. Sell relief as premium. Expand the number of billable events. Tighten control over the gates. That is why this is structural. It is not about one villain. It is about incentives. And incentives do not care whether you are paying attention. They keep moving. Now here is where AI matters again, in one specific way that will affect normal people more than criminals. AI makes it cheap to score everything. Not just your credit, your behavior, your device, your transaction patterns, your account, health. And because it is cheap, it happens more often. The result is that you will deal with more automated uncertainty, more random holds, more just to be safe verifications, more friction that exists because the model cannot be sure. And the natural business response to uncertainty is to sell certainty. That is why you will see more paid trust tiers, more subscriptions that promise smoother access, more offers that basically say, if you pay us, we will treat you like less of a risk. That is not a conspiracy. That is a product roadmap. Now, I must touch the data piece, but with the grounded frame. Data is not just they are watching you. Data is how the system learns what you will tolerate. If you always pay for instant, you are telling the system your pain threshold is low. If you always accept delays without leaving, you are telling the system you are captive. In medieval times, the toll collector did not need data. He had a bridge. In modern times, the gatekeeper has a bridge and a profile. That makes the toll booth smarter. It can nudge you right up to the edge of what you will accept, and that is where the profits are. So when you hear people say, make money, but I feel like I am bleeding, it is not always inflation. Sometimes it is this: dozens of tiny tolls tied to necessities, optimized by systems that know you cannot easily opt out. This is why the digital Gabelle can become socially explosive over time. Not because any one fee is outrageous, but because the burden is constant and uneven. The person with savings shrugs at a hole. The person without savings pays to remove it. That is how small fees become regressive. That is how privilege gets rebuilt, not with crowns and titles, but with subscriptions and priority. Now, I do not want to leave you with vibes and dread. I want to leave you with leverage, because leverage is the only practical antidote to gates. When people escaped medieval-style extraction, they did not do it by complaining louder. They did it by changing routes and reducing dependency on a single gate. The modern equivalent is not living off-grid. It is portability and redundancy. Portability of payments, portability of identity access, portability of where you earn, and portability of where your customers come from. Because the most expensive moment in a gated economy is the moment you have no choice. You do not need 100 options. You need a second door. If you have one way to get paid, a hold becomes a crisis. If you have two, it becomes a nuisance. If your entire income depends on one platform, a policy update can cut your life in half. If you have another channel, you buy time. And time is the one resource the digital Gabelle constantly tries to sell back to you. Here is a simple habit that sounds almost too basic, but it changes how you see the world. This week, notice every time you pay for speed, every time you pay for priority, and every time you pay to remove a new inconvenience. Then ask one question: am I buying something better, or am I buying relief? Buying better is normal commerce. Buying relief is where extraction hides. If you do nothing else, do that, because it trains your eye to spot the toll booths while they are still being built. Now, I want to hear from you, because the comment section on a video like this becomes a map of what is really happening. Pick a side and defend it. Do you think the tightening gates of 2026 are mostly a necessary response to fraud and chaos, or mostly a money and power shift disguised as safety? And if you have had a moment where you paid to get your own access back, where you got stuck in a routine review loop, tell us what it was and what it cost you, in money or in time. If you know someone who keeps saying I make money, but it feels like I am leaking from everywhere, send them this and say, this explains why everything feels like a toll booth now. Want to stir them up, but to give them a lens that makes the leaks visible. And if you want the practical follow-up, the one that turns this story into an audit, you can actually do. The next video will map the 5 choke points most Americans accidentally build their lives around, and how to reduce the risk without becoming paranoid or disappearing from society. I will pin that checklist when it is live. Because medieval extraction thrived on inevitability, and the way out has always been the same: new routes, new institutions, and enough independence that you can refuse. The digital Gabelle's power is that it hides inside convenience and calls itself standard, but it has one weakness: it needs you to accept, quietly, that access is something you rent forever. The question worth sitting with is not whether the gates are tightening. You can already feel that. The question is whether the next big shift in leverage gets built by the gatekeepers, or by the people who finally get tired of paying to feel normal.